This is the Iron Sharpens Iron Movement, sharing insights into the power of people-centric leading.
Hi, this is Jim, and today we welcome to our tribe a leadership advisor to Fortune 500 CEOs and their boards of directors. Widely regarded as America's top CEO coach, he is the best-selling author of Hacking Leadership and Leadership Matters, a Forbes leadership columnist, and is a member of the board of directors at the Gordian Institute, also the founder and chairman of N2 Growth. This is Mike Myatt. Iron Sharpens Iron Movement is brought to you by N2 Growth, a leader in executive search, leadership development, and talent management. We find and develop the world's best leaders. Learn more about our practice by visiting us at n2growth.com or click on the link in the show notes of this podcast. Mike, welcome to the Iron Sharpens Iron Movement. What a privilege it is, not only for myself, but for all our tribe that's listening to this podcast. We know how your company has been the sponsor of this podcast. We're thankful for that. And it sure is a great opportunity to speak to the founder and chairman of N2 Growth. So welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jim. My pleasure.
So, we're going to get right into it, Mike. Everybody has seen your bio. We just got done reading it. And, one of the biggest things that whenever I talk about, I know Mike Myatt, and he's one of America's top CEO coaches. That's always a big, well, bam kind of thing. And I would love, with your experience, you have truly been one of the top coaches in the country. What have you learned the most from coaching?
It's a great question, Jim. And I think the thing that I've learned the most is that, coaching is kind of bi-directional, right? I mean, my job is to help clients, but there's a lot of goodness that bounces back to me as well, right? And I think I think I approach coaching not from hey, zig instead of zag or go this way as opposed to that way, but kind of, providing people with optionality, right? Giving them lots of different ways to assess a different scenario or a different fact pattern. And I learn so much and I've gained so much from working with these folks that it's absolutely phenomenal. I mean, I'm very blessed in that regard because these are crazy smart individuals, right? Crazy successful people that, you can't help but learn things from. So I think for me, that's what gets me out of bed every morning. That's what kind of floats my boat is I not only get to help people who help people who help people, but I get helped in the process. It's a pretty cool thing.
That is a massively cool thing. And have you found that so leaders at that level, they've been around the block for a while. Are they resistant to coaching? Do they view you as just another consultant and an outsider? What do you do to gain trust more than anything else? Because I assume at that level of coaching, the realities are trust comes first.
100%. And I think, that's where we start. That's how the relationships all start. And I think that's why I get the engagements that I get is because they have a feeling that they can connect with me and that we can build that trust bond. And then I do everything in my power to make sure that I maintain that trust bond, right? Because once you break it, game over. But I think the neat thing about these relationships is, I'm not really a consultant. I'm not really just, another professional services advisor. I kind of become their closest personal advisor, maybe outside of their spouse or significant other, because we talk about so many things that have such far-reaching consequences that it becomes a very intimate, personal relationship. I mean, I get invited to birthdays, bar mitzvahs, funerals, weddings, and I'm just kind of part of the family over time, right?
So what are one of the things then, besides going over the P&L, besides looking at the org chart, what are the things that you find to become part of the family that you end up really talking about?
It obviously varies on a case-to-case basis,
Sure.
because every company is different, different life cycle, different stages of maturation, different industry, different vertical, different segment, CEOs that have different levels of maturity. But, I've worked with literally hundreds of public company CEOs around the planet. And I think, what I talk about is kind of helping them focus forward, right? And I know there's a lot of talk about, focus forward, future orientation, what's next, what if, all those kinds of things. But I think CEOs, as a general rule, if they're not careful, can become their own worst enemy because they start to be insular, they start to be inward looking, they start to be bounded and gated by routine and norm and institutional thought and dominant logic. And so, a lot of what I do is just help shape their perspective. And, my working style is different than most coaches. I think, most people that do what I do, they have a monthly retainer, they have a weekly standing call, and it's a pretty pedestrian type of an engagement. And I'm literally on call for my clients, and it's not uncommon that I'll have a CEO call me at 2 a.m. in the morning Saturday night because they woke up and they've got something they want to talk about, or I get a call that says, "Hey, I need you in London on Tuesday," or whatever. And I respond to their needs, and I help them process through that inexorable, intractable, really big, hairy, ugly thing that's keeping them awake at night. And sometimes the conversations are pretty simple, and we arrive at the right conclusion pretty quickly. And other times, they're showstoppers, right? I mean, you get done talking about it, you reach for a bottle of Excedrin because your head hurts.
Yep.
But they're great conversations. They range from culture to diversity to M&A to business model, to capital deployment and allocation, to board governance, and how to a CEO has so many different constituencies, right? And they have to be able to address all of those with great competence, with great skill, and not on a shallow basis, right? And that takes work. So it's not like you spend 20, 30 years, you arrive in the corner office and game over. I mean, that's where the game begins. That's where it starts. That's where the stakes are big. That's where the most upside is. It's also where the most risk is. And it's serious business for serious people.
Have you found in today's, let's just say maybe in your last year or so of coaching, has there started to become a transformational shift? Have you started to see the pressures of the fourth industrial revolution kind of on these CEOs? And is it fairly obvious on the ones that have the growth versus fixed mindset? I mean, where is the mindset of the traditional CEO going today as we sit in today's context?
Much more of a growth mindset than in previous years and with previous generations of CEOs, because the game clock moved a little bit slower, in previous times, right? And that game clock is ticking right now. I mean, it's flat out humming, and they don't have time to really kind of sit back and just let things happen around them. I mean, their core is not going to protect them. Their brand is not going to protect them. Their share price is not going to protect them. The media is not going to protect them. Public policy or capital markets is not going to protect them. They have to move. And so more than moving, they have to get people to come along with them. And so I think in today's world where, people are dealing with that, future of work kind of thing you were talking about a minute ago, right? Very real stuff. But I think what's happening is people are starting to have an epiphany, right? And I think a few years ago, Jim, it was really common to hear a soundbite that went something like this. every company's got to be a technology company or they're going to be extinct, right? I mean, that was kind of the
Yep,
mantra out there.
you
And
bet.
then now we kind of roll into digital transformation, and everybody felt like, holy smokes, I got to get on this train before I miss it, because if I miss it, I'm in trouble. And so they all dove in. And for the most part, they did it incorrectly. And what I
Hmm.
mean by that is, consultants like to sell, shiny new objects, and businesses like to buy silver bullet solutions, right? It's a perfect
Sure.
recipe for disaster. So when digital transformation started, everybody thought about technology, right? And so they just dumped tens, if not hundreds of millions, sometimes billions of dollars into digital transformation projects that, guess what? Crashed and burned. Then it was, okay, let's re-engineer digital transformation, and now we're on kind of the re-engineering of digital transformation, because technology is very real, it's very serious. We're all dealing with it. It's not going to go away. In fact, emerging technology is coming at us faster than ever. But what CEOs forgot is that their business doesn't really have to be a technology business, but it must be a people business. Because it's the
Amen.
people that drive the technology, that know what to do with the technology, that extract value out of the technology. So if you've got a company that has a broken culture or bad leadership or poor communications, and you drop the world's best technology in that company, it's just going to land with a thud. But you drop even modest technology into a company that's a well-oiled machine, that's got a tight culture, they're valued, their vision aligned, they're all kind of oaring in the same direction, and that technology now becomes a force multiplier. So I think what everybody learned in the first few attempts at this thing is technology is not going away. We got to wrap our minds around it, in fact, in new and different and faster ways. But before we worry about that, you better take care of your people. You better take care of your culture. You better get your communication refined. You better get all the right things in place, because if you don't, you're just going to spend a lot of money, and it's going to, I've seen the movie and it doesn't end well. It's painful.
Well, I think you're preaching to the right choir here. I mean, we are absolute big believers in human-centric leading and everything about the human that goes into it. And it's interesting. So I love how you said, it's not only the CEO, but it's about bringing that team along. And there's been study after study here lately that, professional development for the last 20 years of leaders and leadership as they're coming up, even on the technical side, has kind of failed organizations. They really don't have the players on the team that they need to take the field today. And it's interesting. I was talking to a friend of yours the other day, Dr. Ken Snyder.
Yeah, yeah.
And he's the dean of Penn State Kensington.
Mm-hmm.
And, he's one of the biggest champions about, hey, folks, we need to realize that the education system has not caught up to where we need to be to produce the team members to take the field of tomorrow. What are your thoughts on that? What are your thoughts on when we'll kind of stay on this coaching thing, but when you're having these conversations, you and the CEO behind closed doors, and you're looking at that talent pool out there, what are your thoughts on that? Like, are the business schools of today producing the people we need for tomorrow to take the very things that you just talked about?
Okay, man, you're going to open up Pandora's box there, Jim. But look, I do a lot of guest lecturing at business schools, and so I've had the opportunity to stand in front of these amazingly intelligent next generations, right? Very incisive, very thoughtful, very curious, very focused. But here's the ugly little secret. If business schools, the curriculum that they offer their students is basically a two-track curriculum. It's meant to spit out people that go to Wall Street, or it's meant to spit out people that go to the big consultancies, right? The McKinseys, the Bains, the, Deloittes, that type of thing. And so, they produce some critical thinkers. They're well grounded in, basic business curriculum. But what they really lack is kind of the entrepreneurial side, because here's the thing. We live in a different world today, and if even if you're the largest of corporations, you better be pretty darn entrepreneurial and intrapreneurial. You cannot
You
be
bet.
institutional. So, the best corporations out there can reinvent themselves at scale, right? They can reimagine themselves and create it. Take a look at any company that's a quote unquote it company, somebody that's really getting it right in the market. And what do? They hire the best talent possible. They focus them on tough challenges, big problems, sizable opportunities. They're agile, they're flexible. The old days of the hierarchical, very rigid silo institutional corporation, those folks are dead and they don't even know it yet. I mean, you have to move from those types of systems to loose collaborative networks and broad interconnected ecosystems. I mean, think open source, not proprietary, right? And you have to develop self-leading teams, right? Because you can't lead in today's world kind of top down, one to many. You have to have distributed leadership that works in concert, small teams, working together in adjacent, non-adjacent ways to produce phenomenal outcomes, because the bonehead leaders are smart enough to get out of their way, right? And I'll be honest with you, and Jim, this, me well. I mean, that's been my biggest struggle over the years, is getting out of my own way, right?
That's true.
I mean, look, I advise some of the most amazing people in the world, and I'm far from perfect, but I think that's what makes me interesting to these folks, is because, I've stepped in a bunch of messes, but, I've kind of worked my way through them or out of them. And I think I've learned far more from my failures than I have my successes. And so, it's that kind of 360 view of, when these people are seeing things, I've probably seen what they're seeing, dozens of times, because I've worked with so many CEOs in different geographies and different industries. I've seen the signs. I've read the tea leaves before. So it's not like I can just kind of pull the answer out of my bag, but I can get them to a spot where they know what their options are. They can make good, sound judgment, and then they can move forward with kind of a certitude that didn't exist prior, right? And I think that's the value. So, back to the whole business school question, I think, we've got to do better. We've got to teach, our people, when they're out there, whether it's undergrad or it's, grad school, they have to learn to think creatively. They have to learn to be curious. They have to understand that solutions are cheap, answers are cheap. It's getting the right solution for the right reasons at the right time. And that requires rigor. It requires deep, immersive thought. It requires white space. It requires engagement and collaboration. And all of that has to happen real quickly. And so, we need less people that can do pivot tables on spreadsheets, and more people that know how to solve problems.
I love that. And so do you think, we pointed the finger pretty heavily at, business schools and, the educational system and things like that. How about we take a look at, any organization today and its HR department, whatever it is, whether there is a CHRO, whether it's talent development, whatever you want to name it. Are we missing the boat a little bit organizationally, that these are the very people that are trying to bring talent on board, but yet are stuck in their stagnant thinking too? Is there a huge disconnect at kind of that HR level? What do you see out there?
It's getting better. I think there was a generation of CHROs that is kind of retiring out, or I guess in a worst case scenario, dying out. But I think that generation is slowly fading away, and it's a really good thing because they're being replaced by the people that are coming in that don't necessarily want to inherit somebody else's playbook. They want to author their own. And they're looking for new and better ways to do things. And they're surrounding themselves with better people. So look, we talk about this around here all the time. And, the subject is not new to you, Jim, but, to those listening, talent, that's your differentiator, right? And I don't mean to be cliche. I don't mean to, just sound like, okay, here's a trite soundbite. It's the real deal. And if you trivialize it, if you minimize it, you're just shooting yourself in the foot, because what companies that grow rapidly have is they've given their talent the permission to unlock the hidden value in the enterprise, right? It's not just okay, produce this widget or go through this routine, or work your way through these processes. It's, hey, examine how we can be better, do better, think better, be more, help more. And now we're back to that whole creative thought. So this next generation of CHROs, I'm pretty impressed, actually, because they're exploring the right things. And I think, leadership development, to your question, I think it became a check the box activity. I mean, it was like, it was like corporate social responsibility for a while. It became a check the box activity. Diversity was a check the box activity. But when you stop putting things in boxes and you start freeing them from those boxes, right? And you start doing these things the way that you're supposed to do them, that's where the growth comes. And, here's a little pet peeve of mine, but I want people to hear this. I think back to your own career, and I know you, Jim, so I know this doesn't apply to you, but it probably did, maybe at different phases, because it does to us all. But if you look at most people, where do they invest all the time, money, and energy and professional development? It's in the early stages of their career, right? I mean, everybody's sold out. Everybody's sold out on professional development when they're in their 20s and their 30s. But then all of a sudden, that nasty little thing of destination mentality kind of creeps in, right? And it's like, oh, I've arrived. And see, it's when you think you've arrived that you're most at risk. And when you have arrived, the stakes have never been bigger. The risks have never been greater. Neither have the opportunities ever been greater, right? So I think that's the time where you got to double down, triple down. And my clients, I mean, I annoy the heck out of them because I force them to go on development journeys that are rigorous. I mean, what I'm looking for is blind spots. I'm looking for gaps, right? I mean, they're called blind spots for a reason. You can't see them, but other people can. And so, if we can kind of, some weaknesses, look, aren't weaknesses, right? Because if I can't keyboard 100 words a minute, who cares? That's not going to change my career. That's a weakness that I'm not going to learn to solve. But if there's a knowledge gap in a critical area that's important to the enterprise and important to the constituencies that enterprise serves, you better get real smart on that, because if you don't get smart on that, guess what? You bake in obsolescence and irrelevance, and you become dependent upon people that you're not really sure if you're getting the real skinny or not, because you're not smart enough to tell the difference.
Yeah, absolutely. You don't even know what you're looking for. And it's kind of interesting. And, a lot of these white papers that I referred to earlier about looking back on the last 20 years and the leadership failures, that was the issue. They didn't know what real leadership looked like. They didn't know what real talent management looked like because they were never taught it right. They were blind to it. So they just recreated what they thought was right. And it was disastrous.
Well, they just put people in a program and pawned it off on somebody else, and when it failed, it
Yeah,
was somebody else's problem, right? But
absolutely.
that's not only not leadership development; it's not leadership. And I
That's
think
right.
I think that's when it comes to talent, you've got to be able to challenge people and stretch them and get them engaged, and you don't do it by ignoring them or putting them in silly programs or giving them silly things to do. You do it by giving them real responsibility and letting them wrestle with it, right? And I think
Absolutely.
I don't know. It's just when it comes to talent, like we see this all the time. I mean, we're a very well recognized executive search firm, and so most of the work we do is placing board and C-level executives around the world, and the mistakes that I see people make consistently when they're looking for talent is they kind of just look at the position that they're filling through the lens of the person that last held the role, right? They're
Mm,
backfilling. I
yeah,
mean,
bet.
when somebody departs, whether it's a planned or an unplanned departure, or it's a new position that's being created altogether, ding, 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 that's the opportunity, right? That's your opportunity to reinvent, reimagine, say, hey, could we do this better? Could we do this bigger? Should it be sliced up into 2 or 3 roles? Can we consolidate other roles? Can we change the org design? Where are the markets going? What's trending in the atmospherics and dynamics that we're having to grapple with on a daily basis? And what type of next level, next generation talent can we future fill with, right? And most companies just don't think like that. But the ones that do, they're kicking everybody else's what.
So do you find yourself in your 9 to 5 job when you're doing this executive search stuff that a company X hires you and says, Mike, find us this CHRO, and they give you very strict parameters. It's the job description. It's exactly what it's just like Sally that we had 10 years ago and Sam that just left. Do you view it as a part of your responsibility to say, stop, I'm going to offer you a counter view on what you should be doing about this future filling?
So, that is not only the permission space that I give our team and that I give myself, um, but it's our job, right? I mean, we're not in the business of slinging resumes. I mean, any moron can, email a resume to somebody. We're in the business of providing insights and guidance and counsel. They're hiring us for our experience, for our expertise. That's why we have anthropologists and psychologists and
Hmm.
leadership experts and culture experts here, because you can't vet anybody through a single lens. And at the level of talent that we're recruiting, they all look good on paper. They all have
That's true.
gravitas. They all have pedigree. But you don't hire resumes. You hire the entirety of a human being. And if you're not peeling back all the layers on the entirety of that human being, guess what? You're going to miss something. And so, it's not only our job, it's our obligation. And I think it's what makes us different. At least it's what clients say makes us different, is because we actually do push back and challenge. And I think that's where you make the really great hire. The really great hire doesn't come from being on spec. The really great hire comes from looking at the spec, having that aha moment, that point of epiphany that causes you to change the spec to look for
Hmm.
something better, right? That's the name of the game.
Oh, I love that. I love that. And do you find organizationally, do you find that smaller organizations or an entrepreneurial founded type organization are easily adjust to that mindset more than a big Fortune 500 organization? Do you have to work harder the bigger the organization is, to change the mind, to look for the different type of talent, and to have faith in the fact that you're the type of person to find those people.
I think they're we've got monster clients, right? As an example, companies, Humana is a client of ours, Medtronic is a client of ours, Accenture is a client of ours, Hyundai is a client of ours, and the list just kind of goes on and on and on, right? These are big multinational corporations with billions and billions and like tens and hundreds of billions of dollars in revenue, and so, those cultures can be challenging to navigate at times, but you can also find them to be very switched on. So it really depends on the client. So, a much smaller company like an emerging growth company, an early stage startup, VC, PE-backed portfolio companies that they're on a hockey stick trajectory. They might be more nimble, but they may not always be more agile. And there's a difference, right?
Talk to me about that then.
Yeah. So just because you can move quickly doesn't necessarily mean that you move properly. And I think, it's one thing to be able to pivot on a dime. But if you pivot on a dime and you end up going in the wrong direction, not a really productive thing. And so this is the thing that I look for regardless of stage of life cycle in a company. It's, how well does leadership think? It sounds like a goofy question, because you just assume leaders think well. Well, actually, most leaders don't even have the time to think, right? Because they just go task to task to task, meeting to meeting to meeting, email to email to email, phone call to phone, Zoom meeting to Zoom, just all day long, bang, 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 bang. They don't have time to think. And oftentimes when they think they're thinking, they're not thinking, they're emoting. It's an emotional reaction to a level of frustration that occurs because there's a lack of deep, immersive, creative thinking that's not been allowed to exist. And so, when I see a switched on company, whether it's got hundreds of thousands of employees and hundreds of billions of revenue, or it's an early stage startup, look at the way that leaders think and how they shape the thinking of the balance of the organization. And those organizations that think well do well.
Wow, I love that. And I'm going to circle back. When you're coaching, do you suggest to these senior leaders to coach themselves?
You have to. So I want to make sure that I understand the question. I think there's if I understood your question, you're talking about self-coaching?
Nope, and I said it wrong.
Okay.
So I would say, because you just talked about this ability to think and about how these are some of the best attributes that you can have. And you talked about how much you gain out of being a coach and how these experiences, you don't have to be reading 500 books every day, because the experience of coaching others really open up your own perspectives. Do you recommend to the senior leaders that you are coaching for them to coach others?
100%. That's their job.
Yes. It was obvious, but yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, I'm the shoemaker's kid at times, right? I arguably, not to do the humble brag, pat on the back thing, but any way you slice it, I'm probably one of the top 2 or 3 CEO coaches on the planet, right? And now, when I look internally at my team and the amount of time that I spend coaching them, not nearly enough. But I'm trying to teach people how to coach each other, right? And
Yep.
it's a work in progress. But if you're a leader and you're not coaching, like every interaction I have, I think a lot of people have interactions and they think about takeaways, right? I think about leave behinds. And I think for me, when you're engaging with somebody, it's an opportunity to make a difference. So, Jim, think back in your career. Think about the boss or the leader that you had that most influenced your life. You got that picture in your mind?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Okay. Let me tell you why that person is in your mind. Because they believed in you, they invested in you, they leaned into you, they breathed into you, they trusted you, they challenged you, they pushed you. But it wasn't a drive-by, right? I mean, they made a meaningful difference in your life. I mean, am I right?
Without a doubt. Without a doubt. Matter of fact, the picture became more focused the more you talked. There's no doubt.
So,
Yeah.
it's hard sometimes because when you're in a leadership role, your mind is always going, but you've got to slow it down and you have to engage, you have to be present, you have to be in the moment, and you have to serve. So, and sometimes, we get caught up in our own IQ and our own intellectual acuity, and we kind of may already have the answer. And this is probably one of my biggest weaknesses. I'm old. I've been around a long time. I've seen a lot of stuff, but I'm also like an education junkie, right? I can never read enough, learn enough, grow enough. And so, I get into a conversation and I can pretty much finish the conversation in my head while people are developing their thoughts. And I have to just physically stop myself from doing that, because I'm not only cheating myself with the possibility that, guess what, maybe I don't have the answer, or like I said earlier, answers are cheap. Maybe I had the wrong answer. I cheat myself out of perhaps getting new insights or a better answer, but I'm cheating the people out of being able to develop their logic and their critical thinking. And so, it's the old, just because you can doesn't mean you should.
I love that. That's so true. Well, Mike, I tell you, I just wrote something down that I want to honestly say to you as we start to wrap this up, is that you've said this a couple times on this interview today. You said answers are cheap. But I can tell you today, you gave us gold. You gave us some priceless tidbits of really challenging the way that we think every single day and reimagining how we should look at talent and really what is the thing that we future fill and not just fill. And these words are so important to all of us. So I'd love to leave you with the last comment of the podcast, really for this listening audience that's all about human-centric leading, that all is about how do we learn, the title of the podcast, Iron Sharpens Iron, right? It's one person making others better through this critical thinking, through pushing, through pressing, all of those things. You've done that today, no doubt. What would you like to leave us as that last bit of comment, thought, motivation?
Maybe a couple of things. I think a lot of times leaders are always trying to stretch everything, right? And, elasticity is an interesting thing. It's bidirectional. What you yank on snaps back, right?
That's true.
And I think the job is not to leverage people. Is to create leverage for your people, right? And so if you look at that as a mechanism to unlock hidden value in your enterprise, it's, you have to care about your people, you have to resource your people, you have to coach and mentor your people, but it's all about the people. But for the people, there is no company, there is no platform, there are no products, there are no services, there are no customers, there is no revenue, there is no share price. But for the people, you have nothing to lead. So here's the last comment. Leaders that aren't accountable to their people will eventually be held accountable by their people.
I love it. One of the greats, everybody, Mike Myatt. Mike, thanks for joining the tribe today. We are better for it.
Thanks, Jim. I appreciate it. Have a great day.
All right, we'll see you. Thank you. Thanks for joining our leadership movement this week. Talking to Mike today about his insights into coaching at the highest levels and his passion for finding the right talent was just pure gold. Don't forget our show notes are posted on the website with key leader takeaways. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast and tell a friend so we can continue to build our listeners. Until next time, remember that iron sharpens iron. Make yourself and others around you better every single day.